The fire had long since burned down to coals, throwing out a muted glow that barely reached the edges of the weather-worn cabin. Wind hissed through the pine outside, tugging at the shutters like fingers too long away from warmth. Inside, he lay still on the narrow cot, his frame stiff as if he were made of carved oak. Every so often, a twitch in his brow or a catch in his breath betrayed the storm that had come to roost in his head. He dreamed of gunpowder and smoke, of a ridge line smothered in blood and the sound of a boy crying out for his mother just once before silence claimed him. Of horses collapsing mid-charge, of the crackling report of a rifle, his, not his, all the same. The war had ended, they told him. He had walked west to outrun it, but the war walked behind. The nightmares didn't announce themselves. They came like a flood in the dark, fast and wide and too late to stop. He'd wake with his shirt soaked through, breath snagged in his throat like it had caught on a snare. Most nights he didn't scream, just sat bolt upright, fists clenched, heart battering his ribs. But when she started reading to him, her voice, low, steady, shaped like water smoothing stone, would reach through it. She came once a week, with a sack of books and 2 loaves of coarse bread she never charged for. Just showed up around dusk, the hem of her skirt mudded, hair pinned up with less care than it started the day with. Her name was Ruth, the preacher's widow, though she never spoke of him. Folks said she read aloud to those too broken to do it themselves. She never gave a reason. At first he said nothing, let her sit by the hearth and speak into the half-light while he pretended to ignore her. She'd read Hawthorne or Scripture or the letters of dead women from the East, her voice brushing past the sharp edges in his mind. When he could sleep after, she said nothing of it. He never asked her to stay. She never asked why he woke like the house was on fire. Still, she came back. One Wednesday, the wind was sharper than usual, and snow dusted the ground like spilled flour. She knocked and let herself in with her usual nod. "I've got a new one, Dickinson, not sure what you'll think of it." He grunted, meant it to be discouraging. She ignored it and shrugged off her coat, hanging it near the door before setting to stirring the fire. She had a way about her, quiet but not uncertain. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she began, her voice so soft it bent around the logs. "That perches in the soul." He didn't want to listen, didn't want to be softened by the turn of her vowels or the ache behind her careful cadence. But it happened anyway, the way moss grows over stone. Quiet, certain, without asking. He didn't know when it had started, the nightmares easing. It wasn't gone, not truly, but when her voice met the shadows, they didn't bite so deep. They didn't tear him up inside the way they used to. One night in the early thaw of March, he woke to the dream again. The boy's scream, the smell of burning flesh, but he didn't bolt upright, didn't shout or flinch, just breathed hard for a few moments, then turned his head. And there she was, not reading, just sitting in the chair by the fire, hands folded, eyes on him like she was listening for something that hadn't been said. "You all right?" she asked. His voice was gravel, fine. "You weren't." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The fire danced across her features, painting shadows beneath her eyes. He hadn't realized before how young she still was. "I can leave if you prefer," she offered, gathering her shawl. "No," he said, sharper than he meant. "Stay, just stay." She did. The silence stretched long, but it didn't carry weight this time. She didn't read. He didn't sleep. They just sat, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind pressing its mouth to the eaves. It should have felt strange, letting someone in like that. But it didn't. It felt like standing on solid ground after too long adrift. He didn't think of it as love, not yet. That would have been a betrayal of too many graves, but something had shifted, quiet as a stream rerouting under snow. And when she left the next morning, her palm brushed his, light as breath. He carried that warmth long after the door shut behind her. Spring pressed up through the ground in fits and starts, like a creature waking slow from hibernation. Snow turned to mud. Ice loosened its hold on the river, and the woods filled again with the sound of things that lived. He spent more time outside now, fixing the fence where the storm had taken it down, splitting wood even when there was already a stack beside the door. He didn't name the reasons, but they followed him like a shadow, her voice echoing in the rafters after she left, her hand touching his for a breath too long. Ruth kept coming, always near sunset, when the light fell gold across the valley and her silhouette looked like something out of memory. She never missed a Wednesday, though now she stayed longer. Sometimes she'd bring jam in a jar or dried apples from the cellar. Once she mended a tear in his coat without being asked. They still didn't speak of her husband. He didn't ask where the bruises on her wrists had come from months ago, fading but not forgotten. She didn't ask about the deep lines on his back, old lash marks carved like tree rings into skin. There was a kind of reverence in their silence, like not speaking gave the pain somewhere to breathe. But little things began to shift. She started reading on the porch when the air turned sweet with rain. He found himself watching the way she tilted her head while reading, how her fingers curled around the spine of a book like it was something alive. Once, he caught her humming a tune he half remembered from before the war. He hadn't heard it in years. It made something inside him ache in a way that wasn't entirely pain. He caught himself thinking of her voice when she wasn't there. The way she said certain words, the hush between sentences. It lingered in him like the aftertaste of something good, something gone too fast. Then came the thunderstorm. It rolled in late without warning. He woke to it. The sky tore open like a whip and the cabin shook with each blow. Wind screamed through the cracks and rain slammed the shutters with a fury he hadn't heard in years. The dreams came back hard that night. He was in the trenches again, soaked to the bone, boots sinking in mud that smelled like blood. Screams, fire, the groan of wounded men left behind. His breath came fast, raw in his throat, and his hands scrabbled for a rifle that wasn't there. Then, hey, a voice, real, present. It's just the storm. Ruth. She was beside him, holding his shoulders steady as he gasped. Not tight, just enough to keep him tethered. Her touch didn't ask anything. It didn't press. It simply stayed. You're not there, she whispered. You're here with me. It took a long time for the shaking to stop. When it did, he didn't speak, didn't look at her, just let her take his hand, and for the first time he didn't pull away. They sat on the floor together as the storm raged, her back against the wall, his head tipped slightly toward her shoulder. The thunder seemed to grow quieter, not outside, but inside him, like the worst of it had passed. I never meant to stay this long, she said eventually, voice low. I never meant to need you to. Silence bloomed again, but now it was thick with something unnamed, hovering between the two of them like a thread strung taut. She looked down at their joined hands. You don't owe me anything. I know, he swallowed hard, but it's not about owing. There was no kiss, no sudden declaration, just her leaning slightly until her temple rested against his, a small thing, gentle, undeniable. Outside, the rain softened. The next morning, she stayed for breakfast. They ate in quiet, sharing buttered bread and the last of the preserved peaches. She offered to help mend the barn roof. He didn't tell her no. They worked side by side that day, and when he caught her laughing at a chicken too proud for its own good, he realized he'd started waiting for her smile like the first light after a long dark. Still, neither of them said what was growing between them. Not yet. Some things needed more time. Some roots took longer to reach the surface. By summer, the world had turned lush and loud. Crickets sang from dusk till dawn, and the meadow behind the cabin filled with wildflowers tall enough to hide a deer. The creek ran clear and fast, and the trees wore their full green with the confidence of something that had endured. They moved around each other like two animals that had come to trust the same watering hole. Careful at first, then comfortable. She began leaving a shawl draped on the chair by the hearth. He added another plate to the table without thinking. When she didn't come one Wednesday, just one, he found himself pacing the porch at twilight, jaw tight, heart tripping like it had stepped off a ledge. She returned 2 days later, bruised knuckles wrapped in linen. Had to help deliver a baby out by Clay Ridge, she said, setting down her sack with a wince. Colt kicked me on the way in, fool horse spooked at lightning. He made no sound, just took her hand gently, unwrapped it, and changed the dressing with a care so precise it surprised them both. You could have sent word, he murmured. I didn't think I mattered that much. You do. The words hung between them, heavy and plain. From then on, her visits were more frequent, less defined by schedule. Sometimes she came in the middle of a morning, an apron still dusted in flour, a letter folded in her bodice. Other times she stayed the night without comment, sleeping curled beneath his extra quilt while he sat beside her, watching the moon rise through the branches. The nightmares still came, less often, but hard when they did. He never asked her to read, but she knew when to pick up a book and when to simply hum or sit beside him until the shaking stopped. One night he woke with his face wet, not sweat this time, but tears. He hadn't cried since the trenches, since holding a dying boy with his ribs showing through the skin and no one left to write home to. She was already awake, watching him from the chair. Her feet bare, dress wrinkled from sleep. She crossed to him and didn't ask what he'd seen. She just crawled in beside him, careful not to crowd. They lay like that until the sky turned gray, her hand on his chest as if to keep his heart from splintering again. Later he asked her, voice rough from disuse, "Do you miss him?" It took a while for her to answer. Sometimes, not how I thought I would, not who he was, just who I wanted him to be. He nodded, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams. I never wanted anyone to follow me west. I figured I'd live quiet, die quieter. You still might, she said, and he laughed, just once, just enough to shake the grief loose for a breath. Another day, while repairing the barn door together, a storm caught them by surprise. They ran for shelter, clothes soaked through in seconds. She laughed as they ducked inside, hair clinging to her cheeks, the scent of rain heavy in the air. He stood there, chest heaving, watching her. Something in him cracked, not a break, but a giving way, like thawed earth ready for seed. I think I started healing the night you stayed, he said, not before. She looked up at him, eyes clear and unwavering. And I think I started when I stopped pretending I wasn't lonely. They didn't kiss then either, but when he brushed the hair from her face, her hand covered his. Her thumb moved once across his knuckle, a quiet vow. That summer, he built her a small garden by the south side of the house. She filled it with herbs and beans, and he watched her tend them like they were something sacred. And yet nothing between them was named. Not love, not a future, just two people sharing breath and bread and silence. At night she still read aloud, but now sometimes he read to her too. His voice was slower, rough like bark, but steady. She listened with her eyes closed, her hand always finding his. Then the letter came. Delivered by horseback from the post station 2 towns over. He found it on the porch rail, sealed in red wax. He didn't open it for hours. When he did, he sat long by the fire, letter crumpled in his hand, jaw set. She came in near dusk, hair wet from washing, and paused at the look on his face. What is it? He didn't answer right away, just handed her the page. She read in silence. It was from an old comrade, the man he'd thought long dead. Alive, barely, settled on the far edge of Wyoming, asking for help, said he wouldn't have written if he didn't mean it. Said he was being hunted by something cruel and lawless, and he had no one else to call on. She looked up from the paper. You're going. He nodded. Her face didn't break, just her voice. How long? Don't know. Will you come back? He stood, took her hands in his. If I can, if I'm still breathing, I will. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask her to wait. But as he packed his rifle and saddlebag, she stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight over her ribs. And when he mounted up, just past dawn, she reached up to him without a word and pressed her palm to his cheek. Your voice, he said, is the only thing that ever quieted that noise in me. Then take it with you, she said. Every word I ever read, every one you heard, I want them to go with you. He rode out as the sun cleared the trees. Neither of them turned to watch the other disappear. He rode west into a land where the trees grew farther apart and the sky never looked the same twice. Days blurred together, sun up to sundown with nothing but dust and crow calls for company. Nights were colder, harder. He cooked by firelight and slept beneath the stars, the smell of pine and gun oil on his clothes. The letter had said Wyoming, but no town was named. Just a place marked by memory, a valley near the ghosted edge of the Wind River Range. It had taken him 2 weeks to get near. Another 3 days to find the man. He found him holed up in a half-collapsed barn beside a creek that barely remembered spring. Eli Branson. They fought side by side once, both too young to know they were already marked for ruin. Eli looked older than he should have. Beard patchy, ribs too close to the surface, eyes like frost-bitten glass. They said little. There was no need. The danger was real. A gang out of Utah, no law to bridle them. Eli had got in the way of something bloody and wrong, and now they were coming. So he stayed. helped board up the barn and dig lines of sight through the brush, watched the ridgeline like it might grow teeth. Days were long, tense, filled with the sound of hammers and the hiss of whetstones on steel. At night, he'd sit by the dying fire and try to conjure Ruth's voice, syllable by syllable, the way her words made the dark feel less like drowning. He missed her more than he let himself feel, missed the smell of her bread, the rasp of her laughter, the way she never asked him to be more than he was, but still saw the man beneath the scars. Then they came. 5 riders, cloaked in dusk and dust, their spurs a cruel kind of music. They didn't shoot at first, just called out Eli's name like a chant, dragging the moment long enough to draw blood from fear. The fight came sudden, short but not clean. He took a bullet in the arm, another in the side, but stayed upright. 2 men fell fast. 1 ran. Eli got the last one with a knife to the throat and collapsed beside the creek, laughing like he hadn't felt alive in years. It was over, but the wound in his side turned angry, red, and deep, and he knew he wouldn't ride soon, not far. Eli tried to tend it, hands shaking, muttering about debts and mercy and the ghosts that wouldn't quit him. He listened, let the man say what he needed, but as the fever set in, all he could think of was her voice. He saw her in dreams that didn't feel like dreams, just her, standing barefoot on the porch, reading something soft and slow while the wind tangled in her skirts. He'd wake sweating, breath catching like he'd forgotten how to live without her near. It took 10 days before he could mount up again. His sides still burned, but he could sit straight, and the trail called him like a tether pulling at bone. Eli offered to ride with him a while, but he shook his head. "You go north," he said. "There's peace up there for men who want it. I've got something better waiting." He didn't know what would be left when he got back. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe the house would be empty, her shawl gone from the chair, her books boxed away. Still, he rode. Every mile closer felt like a knot unraveling. The land turned familiar. Pines gave way to birch. The sky shifted again, softer now. He crossed the river by the broken bridge and saw the field blooming wild, just like it had that summer before. Smoke from the chimney. He dismounted slow, heart pounding harder than any battle had ever drawn from him. He walked the last stretch, boots crunching gravel, the scent of rosemary and dust and wood smoke catching in his throat. The door opened before he reached it. She was there, in the same dress, hair bound back, hands loose at her sides. Her eyes didn't widen, didn't break. She just breathed in and then smiled. "I heard a rider 2 miles out," she said. "I hoped it was you." He took off his hat, didn't know what to say. Everything seemed too large for words. He stepped forward and she did too. "Are you hurt?" she asked, eyes flicking to the blood-stained shirt, the way he held his side. "I'll live." She nodded. "You came back. I told you I would." And then she reached out and touched him. Not his arm, not his hand, but his chest over his heart. "That's where I kept your voice," he said. "The whole time, right there." She didn't cry, he didn't either. They just stood like that, breathing each other in, the porch boards creaking beneath their feet. "I never meant to fall in love," he said, voice low. "Neither did I." The wind moved around them, through the trees and over the fields, a quiet song only they could hear. Autumn came in hushed tones, brushing gold across the valley and setting the trees to whisper. The air thinned, crisp with the scent of dry leaves and wood smoke. Mornings arrived slower. Nights pressed closer. The world narrowed to the fire, the quiet rustle of pages turning, and the soft thud of boots set aside at day's end. They found a rhythm, not loud, not swift, but steady. He fixed the barn roof in earnest this time, and she carved out a second shelf for the books she kept bringing home. A swing appeared beneath the big oak, knotted with rope and sanded smooth by her hands. She never said it was for him, but sometimes he'd sit there at dusk, watching the sun settle behind the ridge. He still woke some nights with his jaw clenched and his body braced for a fight that wouldn't come. But now her hand would be there, sometimes on his chest, sometimes curled in his, anchoring him before the dream could pull him under. Her voice, if she spoke at all, was barely above a breath. "I'm here," she'd say, and it would be enough. And some nights he read to her, halting at first, then smoother, like his voice had finally remembered what it was meant for. She'd lean against his shoulder, eyes half closed, smiling when he paused to fumble a word or clear his throat. It wasn't about the story. It was about the sound and the sharing. They never made vows, not aloud, but one morning she handed him a coffee cup and said, "I moved the rest of my things in," and he only nodded, as though it had already been true. He started carving again, small things, a sparrow, a whistle, the shape of her hands in pine. He left them around the house like breadcrumbs. She never asked for them. He never stopped. One afternoon, he came back from checking traps to find her in the garden, bent low over a row of stubborn roots. Her skirt was dirt-streaked, hair fallen from its pins. She looked up, and something in her expression stopped him where he stood. "You've been smiling more," she said. "I reckon I have. I like the way it looks on you." He walked over, knelt beside her, and touched the edge of her sleeve. "You brought it back," he said, "the part of me that knew how." She cupped his cheek, thumb grazing the line where a scar met his jaw. "I didn't fix you." "No," he said, "but you saw me, and I reckon that's a kind of healing on its own." They never called it love like folks in books did. They didn't need to. It was in the bread she baked every Sunday, even when the flour ran low. It was in the way he'd mend her boots without being asked. In the way he watched the road, just in case someone else ever came for her. No grand gestures, just presence, just choice. Winter came, and with it the hush he'd once feared. But now the silence between them was full. Her laughter warmed the corners of the room, and his voice, steadier, gentler, rose up to meet it. On the coldest night of the year, he woke to find her already up, stoking the fire. He rose and joined her, wrapping the quilt around both their shoulders. Snow beat softly against the windows, like someone asking to come in. "You ever think about what might have happened if we never met?" she asked. "I try not to," he said. "Hurts too much." She nodded, same. They sat like that for a long while, wrapped in warmth that didn't come from the hearth alone. Eventually, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love was noise," she said. "Big, crashing, wild, but now I know it's quiet, it's in the spaces between." He kissed her then, for the first time. No urgency, no fear, just gratitude, just truth. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the nightmare slept. And the only sound was her voice, whispering something soft, something steady into the dark.